Wendy Lynn Yost. Your butt needs to be in an institution of higher learning by Christmas. Still makes me nervous. That's what my dad said to me my freshman year of college, after I shared with him that I had dropped all of my classes and had instead been going to the mall every day for the last month. If anyone would have told that version of me that I would eventually attend college and go on to earn a bachelor's degree, I would have thought they were nuts. And if anyone would have told that version of me that I would go on to earn a master's degree at my mentor's prompting, not necessarily something I wanted to do, but also go on to teach at a university, I simply wouldn't have believed them. And yet, for nearly all of my professional career, I have been involved in higher education. My butt has literally been in an institution of higher learning since that Christmas more than 2 decades ago. My dad was onto something. He's 6'7", so when he talks in a stern voice, it's worth paying attention to. Much of that time of higher education has involved teaching a leadership class, RTM 302, here. Okay, so I tallied it up, and I have taught RTM 302 leadership for a total of, drumroll, 25 semesters. 25 semesters. Unbelievable. Unbelievable. Within those 25 semesters, there are certain patterns that have emerged that I think are really worth taking note of. And one of them is that in order to lead others, we need to learn to lead ourselves. And the other is that in order to lead ourselves, we need to learn how to listen for what our lives are trying to teach us and take action from that listening. So what I'm going to do is take a 15-week leadership course and condense it into 15 minutes. Let's go back to my freshman year. The day after I disclosed tearfully to my parents that I had dropped out and gone to the mall every day instead. Like, I was actually leaving their house every day pretending to go to class. The lies got very big and very convoluted. So my mom and I headed to the Career Center at my high school, and we looked up who would accept a mid-year transfer so that I could get there by Christmas. And we found a school that had what I needed. It had residence halls, lots of campus activities, including yearbook, which is what I was on in high school, so that was really helpful. And it had a much smaller teacher-to-student ratio than the first college I attended. I am so glad that I didn't give up on college. Even though my dad was the one who instigated this process, I really had to decide for myself that college was something I could do. And it might just look different than I originally expected. So I'm curious, how many of you started something, and then once you started it, you realized it was going to take more than you thought? Every hand in the audience, practically. Thank you. I'm glad I'm not alone in this. Sometimes we only know until we do 10% of something what it's going to take. So that's one of the principles I teach. I knew in that moment with my parents that something was brewing beyond the decisions at hand. And I've come to call those times in our life the places we find ourselves. Now, the places we find ourselves are those intersections in life where we know, like, something's happening here. There's something happening, and I think it actually is bigger than the choice at hand. And they allow us often to transcend circumstance. I just wish that these intersections came with turn signals or directions or some kind of advance warning, because often we find ourselves in them and then are trying, floundering about a bit to figure out what to do. Because when we learn to listen to what our lives are teaching us, that direction comes. And it comes in a quiet way. It comes in a way that doesn't have a lot of words like should in it. And it comes in a way that we can digest and take one natural next step from. Like the time I was on vacation with my parents. And my mom and I were reading outside. And while I started in the shade, the sun eventually found me. It was midday sun, and I was not about to slather on SPF 1000. And so I got up from my lounge chair and went towards the umbrella that was adjacent to me, that had abandoned me, and I tried to move it towards me. So the umbrella was anchored in a patio table with a heavy stone base, and so there I am. I'm trying to shimmy this big contraption towards me. My mom, calmly reading her book, looks up, smiles at me, and says, "Babe, why don't you move the chair instead?" But here's the thing, and here's why I knew it was a place that I had found myself, is that instead of diving back into my book, and anyone who knows me knows I love my books, instead of diving into my book, I sat there wondering, Wendy, where else are you trying to move the difficult item first? And where else might it be helpful to look at things from multiple perspectives before taking action? And it was just so clear in that moment that something was happening beyond the book, the shade, the umbrella, my mom. I could take the advice because she offered it very generously. She wasn't like, "Hey, dumbass, move the chair." She was very generous in her approach, like, "Hey, babe, how about you move the chair?" So, what does it look like to listen to your life? It's actually something that you naturally do for the people that you care about. So I'm going to ask you if you could please call to mind somebody that you care about. I can see by your smiles that you do. Awesome. So how you would listen to yourself and your life is the same way you would naturally listen to someone you care about. Things like paying attention, extending compassion, offering multiple perspectives. Those are things you naturally do for people that you care about. And the thing I find so interesting, especially after teaching this leadership class for 25 semesters, is how rarely we extend those same courtesies to ourselves. So the good news is that this is a learned skill. Learning to listen to yourself is a learned skill, and it's something that you can get better at with practice. And I think it's actually worth getting great at. We're already talking to ourselves all the time, so we might as well add listening and elevate the conversation. So in addition to those things about paying attention, extending compassion, and offering multiple perspectives, I think it's important to also look at how we need to carve out the time to do this. So a couple of things that I do to create space in my life to listen. The first thing is when I wake up in the morning, I actually have a journal. I have a listening journal. I write the date, and I see what comes. And sometimes it's a few bullets, and sometimes it's like a 5-paragraph essay, and I don't even know where it's coming from. Sometimes it doesn't even feel like my voice, but I'm getting guidance, and it's helpful, and it always makes sense for whatever I'm facing in my life. That little journal, that little activity, 5 minutes a day in the morning, sets me up for the rest of my day. Another way to carve out some time in your life for listening. Spend time with people who engage in reflective activities and engages you in ways that get you thinking from multiple perspectives. And my last tip as far as carving out the time is to spend time in places, physical spaces, that lend themselves to your listening. So for me, that almost always involves time in nature. Another favorite is like museum spaces, garden spaces, all the public spaces that anybody who would fly into wherever you live would be really excited to visit. And my favorite is actually dining alone in public. So how many of you like to dine alone in public? My people! But not really, because I don't want to dine with you. Okay, so I actually prefer to dine alone. And if this is something that feels like, oh my God, I could never do that, go to the next town over and pretend you're a tourist. And it was fantastic. So the challenge when we are with ourselves is to not invite distraction. Can you sit with yourself without taking out your phone and starting to scroll? When you are with your 1,000 closest friends, that does not equal alone time. So you gotta coordinate that and put the phone away. And there's actually good reason to override the instinct or the compulsion, the habit to scroll on your phone, because when we learn to listen to our lives in the small daily ways, like we do the umbrella and the chair kind of scenarios, then when life's larger challenges find us, we're differently equipped to meet them. So, I'm wandering the aisles of a grocery store, and as my hand reaches for a case of ginger ale, I burst into tears, realizing that ginger ale was my now ex-husband's drink of choice, and that I never needed to buy it again. And even though all of the logistics and legalities of the divorce had long been settled, and I was really happy in the new life that I was creating for myself, in that moment, in the beverage aisle of the grocery store, a last bit of grief over the life I thought I was going to have and what it might look like leaked out. And I let it. And I remember in that moment thinking, this is the kind of stuff that would unravel me in the past. It would have ruined my day. It might have ruined my week. It might have ruined more. And instead, I listened to myself. I'm like, I'm crying in the beverage aisle. Okay. Like, might have been snot bubble, like that kind of cry. Like that. I mean, yeah, super. Filmed on camera. Yay! That kind of cry. And it was resolution. It was me releasing fully what was to make room for what was coming next. And those are things that I think are just, I mean, it was definitely a place I found myself, literally and figuratively. So, and it's just one of the benefits of learning to listen to your life. When you can move from this is happening to me to this is happening for me, something happens for us. And upsets still come, but we learn to ride them and get curious instead of being wiped out by them. And we also get to start to see the gifts that are available, even in the toughest of places that we find ourselves. There's also a bonus benefit. Do you want to hear the bonus? Bonus benefit coming at you. A lot of times when we listen to what our lives are teaching us, things get handled before they become big things. So, those two recurring themes. In order to lead others, we need to be able to lead ourselves. And in order to lead ourselves, we need to be able to listen to what our lives are trying to teach us and then take action from that listening. This is like a muscle that gets flexed, built, rebuilt, broken down, rebuilt again and again. And it's something that can be learned. And those small daily interactions are what position us to differently contend with the bigger stuff when it finds its way to our doorstep. And allows us to start to trust ourselves in new ways and know that we can be relied upon. And I think that is an invaluable place to find yourself. So, are you willing to listen to what your life is trying to teach you? Are you willing to extend compassion, pay attention, and offer multiple points of view to yourself, the way you would a dear friend? Are you willing to carve out that 5 minutes a day, some way that works for you, that would provide that container for listening that's so important? And here's the thing, I full-heartedly believe that when we learn to listen to what our lives are teaching us, especially in the places that we find ourselves and we are aware that more is happening than what meets the eye, then we're able to overcome obstacles and seeming adversities with far greater ease. Listening to ourselves as we would a dear friend, extending compassion to ourselves, and paying attention to what our lives are teaching us. I think that is an idea worth spreading. Thank you.